All right, welcome back to episode number 6 of the Coastal Performance Nutrition Podcast. My name is Callum. I'm an online and face-to-face coach. What are you doing? I'm an online and face-to-face coach based here on the Central Coast, New South Wales, specializing in nutrition. And this is my staffy, Hank, who joins me for all of my intros. So, episode number 6, what is protein? All about protein. So I'm going to cover what exactly protein is, how much you need, when you should have it, and why you should have it. And cover the nuances around how the amount you need changes depending on what your life and activity levels looks like. Ready to go, bud? There it is. All right. Hank's going to leave us. So episode number 6, all about protein. I think when I was thinking of my next episode, I thought it was important to cover protein just because I'll cover carbs and fats eventually as well. But protein has become such a massive trend, and a lot of people know that protein is good and protein is beneficial, but they don't exactly understand why or how much is enough. Like, at what point do you go, okay, I've had enough protein. I don't need to look for a dessert that has 40 grams of protein. I've had enough. So I want to try and help you understand what protein is. It's more than just something for muscle growth. When you need to consume it, why you need to consume it, and how much you need to consume. So what is protein? Protein is a macronutrient, and macronutrients are just nutrients that we need a lot of because they provide us with energy. So protein, carbs, fats. Some people call alcohol a macronutrient because technically it's one of the only other things that gives us calories. A lot of the other nutrients don't give us energy. They still do other functions, but they just don't give us energy or calories. Protein is a macronutrient. When we consume protein, we chew it, or I hope you chew it, or we drink it, and it gets into our stomach and it's broken down into amino acids or peptides. Now, peptides, a lot of people hear peptides and they're like, oh, peptides, scary word. Peptides are just chains of amino acids. So just think about all these little amino acids linked in a chain, a long chain of anywhere from 10 up to thousands of amino acids linked in a chain. That's what a peptide is. So our digestive system breaks down protein into individual amino acids, which there is 20 of. Some people say 21. There's one amino acid, I think it's seleno something, that is, some people consider it an amino acid, some people don't. Anyway, besides the point, when we digest protein, it's broken down into individual amino acids or into peptides, and usually smaller peptides of 2 to 3 amino acids, just so we can actually absorb it into the bloodstream, because we can't just consume massive peptides and then absorb it into our bloodstream. For the most part, it has to be broken down. Now, the function of protein goes beyond just muscle growth and repair. Protein is not just something that gives us hopefully big muscles. It serves a lot of other functions. It's important for our immunity and the production of antibodies, which are essentially little alarm signals within our immune system that tag things as foreign to help our immune system do its job. It's important for hormonal production. We have hormones that are made out of amino acids. It's important for enzyme activity. Enzymes are just basically little molecules that cause sparks. So they help reactions or chemical reactions occur within our body. So a lot of enzymes are made of proteins, and they make neurotransmitters as well. Neurotransmitters, neuro meaning brain or nervous system, transmitters are helping you send a message. So neurotransmitters, a lot of them are made from proteins or amino acids, and they just help us send signals within our body and help us talk, move, all the rest of it. So obviously, there's more functions of protein as well, but yeah, protein is important for more things other than just making muscles big, all right? Like I said before as well, we have 20, some people say 21 amino acids, but we have essential and non-essential amino acids. So essential amino acids are the ones that our body can't produce enough of without consuming from food or supplements, I guess. Then we have non-essential amino acids. Non-essential amino acids are the ones where our body can produce enough of them through other chemical reactions. We don't have to consume it through food. Some of those non-essential amino acids can become conditionally essential. So during certain states, such as illness, we may need to be more conscious of consuming more of those non-essential amino acids. But for the most part, we have essential amino acids, which we need to get from food, and non-essential amino acids, which we don't need to get from food, but we get them from food anyway. So yeah, it's more the focus when we're talking about protein quality is usually more on the essential amino acid side of things. And it's probably, I'll cover it in a little bit, but it's probably why you've heard that plant-based proteins and animal-based proteins, they aren't really like for like. And the reason that a lot of people, you've probably heard people say that animal-based proteins are better than plant-based proteins is because animal-based proteins are complete proteins. Complete proteins are proteins that have all 9 of the essential amino acids. Incomplete proteins are proteins that don't have all 9 of the essential amino acids. But just because a protein is considered incomplete in the case of some plant-based options like rice or peas, it doesn't mean we can't turn them into a complete protein by mixing and matching. So in the case of vegans or vegetarians, or more so vegans, if they had just rice, the protein from the just rice would be an incomplete protein. If they had just peas, that would also be an incomplete protein. But we have what's known as complementary proteins, where mixing certain types of proteins that are incomplete, they sort of complement each other. So they're complementary. So yeah, we have proteins that are complementary. So when we look at vegan proteins, things like rice and pea protein, they're quite complementary. So if you combine them, it turns it into a complete protein, let's say. But I'm already going on tangents and we're only like 6 minutes in. Apologies. Let's talk about how much. So how much protein do you need to consume? We have the RDA, which is essentially the bare minimum. The bare minimum to meet your base level requirements, not the amount that you need to reach a really good state of health or optimal, like some people call it, but just the absolute bare minimum for 97, 98% of the population. That number is set at 0.8 grams per kilo of body weight per day. Now, that number was set quite a while ago. Now we have a lot of new data that suggests it should be higher. So I like to say at a bare minimum, most people should be having 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day as a minimum, just to look after your health and function. All right. Even if you're not training, even if you're not pregnant, even if you're not an older adult, all of those cases require differing amounts. But if you're just a general Joe Blow, don't really care about your training, but you just want to make sure you're healthy, it's probably a good idea to consume around about 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. Now, I've got a list behind me that I want to cover as far as how much, because how much protein you have is really depending on your personal situation. So older adults, they need a little bit more protein. So the previous number that I gave, 1.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day, for older adults, that probably goes up to anywhere up to 1.5 grams of protein per kilo per day. And that is just because as you get older, you develop what's called anabolic resistance. Your body becomes less effective at utilizing protein for the purpose of muscle growth or muscle repair. And a massive issue in the current day and age is what we call sarcopenia, which is basically the age-related loss of muscle mass. And to prevent sarcopenia and prevent age-related muscle mass, alongside resistance training, of course, one thing you can do is increase your amount of protein that you consume. Just because your body is becoming less effective and less efficient at using protein for muscle growth and repair, if we consume more of it, we can make sure that we're covering all of our bases. So as you age, it's probably a better idea to consume more protein, all right? So, 50, 60, 70, it's probably not a bad idea to err on the higher side of protein consumption. I was going to touch on pregnant and lactating women. I won't touch on it too in depth because it's a little bit, it can go a little bit deep in the weeds, but Just my opinion. This is not medical advice. Please check with your doctor. But for pregnant and lactating women, it's probably a good idea for pregnant women, as you progress through your pregnancy, it's probably a good idea to go anywhere from 1.1 up to 1.7 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. Obviously, because you're growing another human, your protein demands are going to go up amongst everything else that your body has to take on during that period of time. And then for lactating women, so women who are breastfeeding, again, you are supporting another human. So it's probably a good idea to go towards that 1.6, 1.7, even potentially a little bit higher grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. Okay. Now, let's touch on what you're probably wanting to know. I'm going to break it down behind me. Let's say we'll touch on muscle growth. We'll touch on muscle growth and strength is sort of a similar situation. We'll touch on fat loss and we'll touch on performance. So a good catch-all range for protein intake for people who are training and interested in progressing in their training is 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day. So if you're a 100 kilo male, 1.6 would be 160 grams of protein per day. 2.2 would be 220 grams of protein per day. Maths guy over here. But that is obviously a range, and it's like, well, where the fuck do I go within that range? So for muscle growth, you will get slightly more benefit by going to the top end of that range. So going from 1.6 up to 2.2, you might get a slight increase in your muscle growth and strength outcomes, but slight. Yes, it adds up over time, but the issue that I see with a lot of people these days is they're so obsessed with protein that they forget about the importance of essential fatty acids, so essential fats such as fish oil, and they forget about the importance of carbohydrates as well. So the higher you go with protein, the lower you need to go with carbs and fats, and carbs and fats are important too. So it's a very nuanced discussion, but for the most part for muscle growth, 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day is a pretty good catch-all range. Going towards the lower end, so like the 1.6, even down to like 1.4, you're still going to grow a shit ton of muscle. If you go towards the higher end of that range, there's a couple of different benefits. You might gain a little bit more muscle, and because of the thermic effect of protein, so I spoke about this in a previous episode, when you consume protein, you burn more calories through the process of digestion compared to the consumption of carbs and fats. So if you push your protein a little bit higher and drop carbs and fats respectively, then you may experience in a calorie surplus, so trying to gain weight, you may experience more muscle growth but less fat accumulation at the same time. So sort of a win-win. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, like if you want to really cross your T's and dot your I's, it's probably a good idea to go towards 2 grams, 2.2 grams per kilo of body weight per day. Some people will tell you to go a little bit higher, but I am not really that comfortable recommending higher than 2.2 or 2.5 as like a max. There's some very nuanced situations where I would go higher, but that's very rare. Probably beyond the scope of this podcast, but I may touch on it in a little bit. Fat loss, that is, again, a different discussion. When we are losing fat, we obviously want to, at a minimum, maintain our level of muscle mass. And if you're in a lot of cases, unless you're very advanced, we can probably still grow muscle mass in a calorie deficit as well. So lose fat and build muscle at the same time, as long as our training performance or our training intensity is very high. Now, in a fat loss phase, as you get deeper into a fat loss phase, it may be a solid idea to increase your protein intake for the purpose of muscle preservation. There is some data going as high as, say, 2.5, even up to like 3 grams per kilo of body weight per day. The reason that going higher protein during a fat loss phase is beneficial, yes, it's going to help with muscle preservation, so maintaining muscle mass and muscle growth, but it's also going to help with your appetite. Again, like I spoke about in a previous episode, consuming more protein on a daily basis. Protein is one of the most filling macronutrients when compared to carbs and fats, but it also burns the most calories in the process of digestion. These may seem like small things, but they add up. So the small amount of calories you burn through digestion compared to consuming the same amount of carbs and fats, on top of the appetite suppression that you get from consuming higher protein, is why it's probably a good idea to consume higher protein during a fat loss phase. Now, 1.6 grams per kilo of body weight per day is still high protein. I think these days a lot of people have been convinced that they need to go super high protein, but 1.6 grams per kilo body weight per day is still very high protein. But there may be some cases during a fat loss phase where you go even higher than that, mainly when you're getting very lean and hunger starts to get really out of control. If you're doing a more rapid fat loss phase, for example, I've got one client at the moment, shout out Tim, who is doing a very aggressive cut for a powerlifting prep. Had to cut 11 kilos in the space of about 7 weeks, maybe 8 weeks. So obviously that results in around about a 1,200 to 1,400 calorie deficit per day on some days. And that sucks. So to make sure he's retaining muscle mass and to make sure his appetite is as low as possible, as low as it can be on that amount of calories or in that high of a calorie deficit, I have increased his protein to, I think it's about just shy of 2 grams per kilo body weight per day. So in a fat loss phase, it can be helpful to go a little bit higher for appetite suppression and for muscle growth or the maintenance of your current level of muscle mass. Performance. So protein intake for performance. This is, again, a very nuanced discussion. When you are in a sport where you're training a shit ton, you're doing a lot of training, you obviously have an increased recovery demand. You're asking more of your muscles and you are probably causing more muscle damage. You may need more protein to help you recover from that activity. But this is where the nuance comes into it, because if you watched my last episode on performance nutrition, going too high in protein, for example, during a fat loss phase, can help with appetite suppression and can burn some extra calories. But when we're looking at performance, especially in the case of endurance sports where you're burning so many calories and you need to consume so many calories, yes, going higher protein may help a little bit with the recovery side of things, but for a lot of people, it actually prevents them from ticking that first box in performance, and that's consuming enough calories to make sure they're not underfueling. So it's a bit of a catch-22 where you push your protein as high as 2.7 grams per kilo of body weight per day. That's a number that has been shown to benefit that specific population. So you can push your protein that high, but if you do, you may experience extremely low appetite in relation to the amount of calories that you have to consume. So it creates this issue where the number one important thing for recovery is consuming enough calories. So if you are consuming such a high amount of protein or such a large amount of protein that it is completely blunting your hunger, then the potential benefits of going higher in your protein intake up to 2.5, 2.7 grams per kilo per day, that is the potential benefit of that is clouded by the fact that you're not meeting your daily calorie needs. So it's a very nuanced discussion, and it's why you should probably get a coach because a lot of this stuff comes from research papers, and the recommendations given in research papers, they usually have to give, some sort of concrete recommendation, or a lot of them do, or a range, which is why we have 1.6 to 2.2. But where you go within that range is based on, in a lot of cases, it's based on the whole picture. So if I have an athlete who comes to me and for 3 years they've been consuming 2.5 grams of protein per kilo per day, they have no issues with their hunger's through the roof, they could eat a cow if they wanted to and still be hungry, then I'd probably keep their protein up around 2.5 if they are a really high performance athlete and doing a lot of exercise, which is creating a massive recovery demand. But if I have someone come to me and they've been under fueling by 5, 6, 700 calories per day on average for months, and they're eating 2 grams of protein per kilo per day, and they're stuffed, they just can't get any more food in their system, then I would not be inclined to increase their protein. I would actually be inclined to decrease their protein. So that's why we have these ranges where what people need to understand when it comes to the range recommendations for protein consumption, let's just say even the 1.6 to 2.2. The reason it's recommended as a range is because we do see this benefit as we come from 0.6, 0.8, 1, 1.2, 1.4. But as we get to 1.6, the curve flattens off. So it might be a very slight upward line from 1.6 to 2.2, but it's a potential benefit. It's a benefit, but it's in a relative sense, it may not be that large, or in an absolute sense, meaning that, we may see, consuming 2.2 grams of protein compared to 1.6, we may see an extra 2% of muscle growth. But when we're talking about people gaining a kilo of muscle per year, which for a lot of advanced people is very realistic amount to gain, and we do the maths on that, a kilo being 1 gram, 1,000 grams, 2% of that is 20 grams. So the difference between consuming 1.6, this is an example, by the way, but the difference between consuming 2.2 versus 1.6 is an extra 20 grams of muscle mass. So that's a hot tip for you. If you see people throwing out percentages when they're talking about benefit, you've got to understand the difference between a relative and an absolute difference. So an absolute difference is, let's say, the total number. So a relative difference is the percentage. So let's say 1.6 grams of protein led to a kilo of muscle gain over the course of the year, and the 2.2 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day, they experienced 2% more muscle growth compared to the 1.6 group. 2% of a kilo is 20 grams. That's not a lot. That may be worth it to you, but for a lot of people, it's probably not worth it, and they would probably be better off, focusing on something else, if for no other reason other than the financial cost of protein. And then the absolute benefit is, or the absolute is, what actual number are we seeing? The relative increase is 2%. The absolute increase is 20 grams. So it's important that you don't see percentages and think, oh, fuck, that's huge. It may be such a small difference. Even though the percentage amount looks big, it may be this particular situation where it's like, hey, 2% extra muscle growth. A lot of people go, hoorah, I'm going to eat more protein. And then you look at the absolute number and it's 20 grams over the course of a year. And it's like, like a traditional scale isn't going to pick that up for 5 years. 5 years. So to gain 0.1 kilo of extra muscle mass, it's going to take 5 years for that difference to show. So to put it in perspective, I hope that wasn't a completely random tangent. It probably was. So I think that summarizes how much, for the most part, for if you're training in the gym, 1.6 to 2.2, that's a pretty good range. If you're doing a fat loss phase, 1.6 at a minimum, you may see benefit from potentially going as high as 2.5. There's some studies going as high as 3 plus, but in my experience anyway, as a coach, the highest I've gone is 2.4, I believe, which was, again, for someone doing a very aggressive cut who needed the extra protein for muscle retention. We needed to pick up those 1%ers to make sure they didn't lose any muscle mass, and also for the appetite suppression as well. Now, when it comes to what I want to talk about quickly is the appetite suppression when it comes to protein. So a lot of people hear that protein is great for appetite suppression, and they go, okay, I'm gonna drink a protein shake. And yes, okay, protein shakes can suppress appetite, but you're kind of like missing the forest for the trees. Our first consideration is consuming it from whole foods, because it's not just the protein that's suppressing appetite, it's the foods it's found in as well. So if you think of foods that are relatively lean protein sources, they're probably going to be the most filling. So I'm talking a lean cut of steak, white meat, fish, prawns, low-fat Greek yogurt or low-fat dairy, egg whites. They have a lot of protein and they have a lot of volume. And if you compare a lean steak with 30 grams of protein versus 30 grams of protein powder, they have the same amount of protein, but I can guarantee you that the steak that has 30 grams of protein, which is probably about 150 grams of steak, is going to have a much higher, or it's going to suppress your appetite by a lot more than that 30 gram serve of protein powder. So when you hear that protein is, good for your appetite, make sure you're consuming like whole food versions of protein, because just drinking protein shakes all day, like I think the biggest thing that I try and steer people away from when we move into a calorie deficit is let's try and be mindful of the calories that we're drinking, because drinking calories is just not filling. Like if I gave you a 1,000 or 1,500 calorie milkshake, you'd be able to down it pretty easy. If I gave you a 1,500 calorie meal, it'd take a bit of effort. So, and more time as well. So you have time to register that you're actually full, versus drinking stuff, you just slam it down and then you're like, oh, far out. It's easier to go past the point of fullness when you're drinking stuff. So that's just a little side tangent. Now, the timing of protein. So obviously you've got your ranges of how much protein to have. I hope you have a decent idea about that now. But how often do you have protein and how much do you have at each time? I did a post about this the other day on the, you can only absorb 30 grams of protein per meal. Massive myth. It came from early studies which basically indicated that muscle protein synthesis, which is the process that creates muscle tissue, consuming around 20 to 40 grams of protein was shown to near maximize the muscle protein synthesis response, which is the molecular at a basic chemistry level. Muscle protein synthesis is the process that builds new muscle, and people took that from, hey, 30 grams of protein is enough to maximize muscle protein synthesis, therefore anything above that is sort of wasted. But that's not really how it works. You can absorb as much protein as you consume. If you don't absorb it, you will shit yourself. So if you eat protein and you shit yourself, maybe you didn't absorb it. But yeah, all of the protein that you eat, you will absorb it. We have some studies showing as high as 100 grams of protein at once. And yeah, it's not like they just consumed 100 grams, absorbed 30 grams of it and shat the other 70 grams out. Like you're going to absorb all of it. So don't think that if you have more than 30 grams in a meal that it's just wasted. It's just not. Because the most important thing when we're talking about daily protein intake or just protein intake overall is, are you having enough per day? So before you think about timing, are you having enough? There's no use stressing about your timing if by the end of the day you're not having enough. Like if you go, hey, I got to consume, let me do some quick maths. I got to consume 150 grams of protein per day. I'm going to break it up into 5 servings of 30 grams. Is my maths right? Pretty damn good. I'm going to break it up into 5 different servings. And 3 days a week, you only consume 120 grams because you don't manage your time well enough, and one of your meals is 3 hours late. So then you don't give yourself enough time in the day to have that 150 grams. Then in that case, the timing is completely pointless because you're not even doing the number one thing, which is making sure you're consuming enough protein on a daily basis. So the number one important factor is having enough protein per day. That's the first thing we want to tick off. So if you're stressing about timing, but you're not even consuming your daily protein needs, you're missing the forest for the trees. I would prefer a client if they, like for example, I have some clients who are genuinely very, very busy in high level positions in their workplace, and some days it's just not realistic for them to eat 2 to 3 even servings of protein across the course of the day. So I might load their breakfast up with as high as 60 to 80 grams of protein just to get ahead of the 8 ball, so that it makes 160 grams per day seem like a much more achievable number, because we tick off, basically half of that with their first meal. And then in the next 2 meals, they've only got to get 40 grams in each meal and they're done for the day. So yeah, overall, most important factor is daily target. But once you feel comfortable with your own ability to hit your daily target, it definitely wouldn't be the worst idea to cross your T's and dot your I's. And by doing that, splitting up your protein as like 3 to 5 meals per day or 3 to 5 protein feedings per day is probably a solid idea. For a lot of my clients, that's usually, a good hit of protein in 3 meals, and then maybe 1 or maybe 2 snacks per day with protein as well. But 3 meals, if you're having protein in all 3 main meals and you're hitting your daily protein target, that's enough. There's obviously all of these conversations, there's always nuances. Like there always might be benefit to splitting up your protein, in 5 servings per day. It might be better to have five evenly distributed servings of protein per day compared to 3. That's the, try not to focus. If you hear someone saying that it will, it may not. And again, think back to the relative difference that I was talking about where, we might be arguing over tiny little differences here. So I think being stressed about protein timing, the stress that creates is probably going to be more detrimental than just eating less servings of protein per day and making sure you're hitting your daily target. So don't stress about timing too much, all right? Timing around workouts. Again, something that a lot of people stress about. They finish a workout and they're like fucking sprinting home to slam a protein shake. It's probably not necessary. If you're waking up and training fasted, you've had no food, or you're training protein fasted, so you're training in the morning and you didn't have protein before you trained, it's probably a good idea to have some protein soon. Within that half an hour to 45 minutes after your workout, probably a pretty good idea to have some protein. But let's say you're training at 4 p.m. and you had a big hit of protein at 2 p.m. You probably don't need to rush home to have some protein, because digestion isn't just a matter of eating food and then just shitting it out half an hour later. Digestion takes a long time, and you don't just eat 30 grams of protein from a steak or 40 grams of protein from a steak and it all just appears in your bloodstream like ta-da. It's a slow drip. So you can imagine it like a dripping tap where you eat a bunch of protein and it goes into your digestive system, which is basically a hole through the middle of your body. It's not actually inside you. Weird thought, but I remember one of my professors said that to me. So lost my train of thought now. Yeah, it's a slow drip. So you eat protein and it's slowly digested and slowly drips protein into your bloodstream over the course of, anywhere from, depending on how much protein you had, it could be anywhere from 1 to 2 hours up to 8 to 10 hours. So there's a chance that if you ate a meal before your workout, it's probably still digesting, especially considering when we train, we divert a lot of our blood flow away from our central organs, away from our digestive system, and towards our muscles, towards our heart, towards our lungs, in order to support the exercise we're doing. So when there's not as much blood flow in our digestive system, digestion isn't happening as fast as it normally would. So chances are, if you're having a decent hit of protein within the 1 to 3 hours before your workout, it's still probably digesting after your workout. So you're still getting a slow drip of amino acids into your bloodstream. And remember, amino acids are the broken down form of protein. So it's not like you have to go home and rush to have protein. Again, it's not going to hurt to have protein straight away, but there's no immediate rush. As long as you have, a good hit of protein within the 45 to 90 minutes post-workout, you'll be fine. Even as far as 2 hours post-workout, you'll be fine. Again, think of what I said before. The most important factor is, are you having enough protein on a daily basis consistently over a long period of time? It's not worth worrying about the small little details, because I genuinely think this is like a more general nutrition thing. The stress that people have around ticking off these tiny little bits of minutia, or not minutia, but these tiny little 1%ers, the stress that people develop over ticking off those tiny little 1%ers, that stress is probably more of a detriment than the benefit that they're getting from those little 1%ers. So like they're picking up like a 1% improvement by stressing about their protein timing, but they're so stressed about their protein timing that they actually activate a stress response, which acts as a detriment. So I think for the most part, it's, unless you feel capable to, and it feels relatively simple to pick up those 1%ers, I wouldn't stress about them. Again, that's just my opinion. So yeah, don't stress if you miss your post-workout shake. It's not the end of the world. All right. Now, common food options. So the sourcing of protein is something that is very nuanced topic. There's a lot of people who will make the claim that animal-based protein is far superior to plant-based proteins. And for the most part, I do think that animal-based proteins are going to be a higher quality compared to plant-based proteins. And it's going to be easier to hit your protein target through animal-based options. All right, so meats, eggs, yogurt, all that sort of stuff. But I wouldn't say that plant proteins are far superior if you choose the right ones. Because remember what I was speaking about earlier on, where we have essential amino acids and we have non-essential amino acids. So proteins that have all of the 9 essential amino acids are considered complete proteins. And animal-based proteins are great because they are complete proteins. So they have all of the essential amino acids that we need. A lot of plant proteins are incomplete because they don't have all of the essential amino acids. But I think where people get lost is that we don't eat single ingredients, or like for the most part, you don't just sit down and have a bowl of rice. You don't just sit down and have a steak. I mean, some people might, I get it. But we eat meals, or we eat, combinations of food. And in the case of a vegan or a vegetarian diet, yes, some vegan or vegetarian options are incomplete, but it's a good thing that we can eat more than one food in combination. We can eat like a meal with multiple things. So achieving a high quality, or achieving your protein targets and keeping the protein to a high quality on a vegan or a vegetarian diet can be a little bit more difficult. Vegetarian, probably not so much, because they can have, dairy and eggs, which are extremely high quality proteins. But more so for vegans who can't have animal-based proteins or choose not to have animal-based proteins, you just have to be a little bit more considerate about the sources of protein and making sure that you are being intentional about complementing protein sources. And that's too far beyond the scope of this video, but like I spoke about earlier on, you look at rice protein, it's an incomplete protein. It's lacking some of those essential amino acids. You look at pea protein, it's an incomplete protein. It's lacking some of those essential amino acids. But when we combine them together, they complement each other. They sort of fill in the gaps. One of them has some essential aminos that the other one doesn't have. So food combinations can create, or can fix a lot of issues with the whole protein quality argument when it comes to vegan sources compared to animal-based sources. And besides the point, when we look at vegan proteins, we actually do, a lot of people will go out on a limb and say we don't have complete proteins that are not animal-based, but we do. Soy products are complete proteins, okay? So particularly tofu and tempeh, they are, I would say, some of the highest quality plant-based proteins or vegan proteins that you can have, and they are a complete protein source. Some other high quality proteins, potato protein is quite high quality, but it would be very difficult to eat enough potatoes to hit your daily protein needs. But again, it all adds up. And thankfully these days as well, if you are on a vegan diet, there's nothing wrong with supplementing your diet with a protein powder. Just being mindful that for the most part, vegan proteins have been shown to contain a lot of heavy metals, namely lead, which is not great. So making sure you're becoming aware of consumer reports if you can access them to see what the lead content is. But yeah, protein powders, vegan protein powders are going to be great as well. Potato protein isolate is actually not a bad idea. Rice and pea blends, so a blend of rice and pea protein is a pretty good idea as well. There's a new one as well, which is mycoprotein. It's essentially protein from mushrooms or fungus, which is actually very high quality. So yeah, there's plenty of options. And I think, again, we have to, when we're talking about protein, we've got to distinguish whether we're talking about just for, general Joe Blow who wants to build some muscle, or if we're talking about a bodybuilder who is concerned about gaining 1 kilo versus 1.001 kilos of muscle mass. Are you trying to optimize, or are you happy picking up the 90% and, calling it a day? So for the most part, animal-based proteins are going to be, in general, higher quality, but that's not to say there aren't high-quality plant-based proteins, particularly soy-based proteins, tofu and tempeh. They're going to be a great choice for overall daily protein intake. And, there's nothing wrong with, if you're vegan, having a big slab of tofu or tempeh every day and getting 80 to 100 grams of protein from that. It's fine. So, to wrap this up, I'm going to go back over sort of my general discussion, what I spoke about. For average Joe Blow, 1.2 grams per kilo of body weight per day, in my opinion, that's a pretty good recommendation. If you are older, as you get older, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, as you experience sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, probably not the worst idea in the world to start to consider moving towards a higher protein diet just to offset some of that anabolic resistance, where our body becomes less effective or less efficient at utilizing protein for the purpose of muscle growth and repair. If you're in a fat loss phase, 1.6 to 2.2, pretty good idea. In some rare cases, I might go even higher than that. The reason we want to be considerate of protein during a fat loss phase is because it's not only great for retaining muscle mass or helping us build muscle mass whilst losing fat, but it's also great for appetite suppression as well, which helps us adhere to our calorie deficit. If you're aiming to grow muscle or gain strength, again, 1.6 to 2.2, it's a pretty good range. Going towards the higher end of that range may be helpful to pick up those 1%ers and may also be helpful for the purpose of preventing fat gain in a calorie surplus. And then for performance athletes, again, for really high performers who are doing a lot of training, going super high protein may help with the extra recovery demand, above that 2.2 grams per kilo per day. But that's a case-by-case basis. And it takes into account that going super high protein, as I said before, during a fat loss phase can help with appetite suppression. And if you're trying to fuel someone who's running marathons and needs 4,000, 5,000 calories a day in some cases, then having super high protein may hold back their appetite and prevent them from consuming enough calories on a daily basis, which is more important than your protein consumption, believe it or not. So, calories for recovery, eating enough calories is the first box to tick, and then protein intake after that. So if going really high protein is going to prevent you from eating enough calories, then it's probably not a great idea. What else? And then again, to finish that off on the performance side of things, some people or some performance athletes in relation to needing to consume enough calories, if their appetite's just not there to support that amount of calorie consumption, in my experience, I have dropped a lot of people's protein to make sure that their hunger comes back up to where it should be so that they can eat enough food comfortably and not be bloated all the time. The most important consideration is eating enough protein per day. And if you feel comfortable with your ability to eat enough protein per day, then splitting that protein up over 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 meals may provide an extra benefit. But again, 3 to 5, three separate servings of protein per day, is going to tick the boxes for most people. And aiming to have 20 to 30 grams at least in those protein serves is probably a good idea as well. For post-workout protein, you don't need to rush home to consume a protein shake. But if you trained, fasted, and you didn't have any protein before your session, 30 to 45 minutes after your session, probably a pretty good idea to have some protein. But if you ate, 1, 2, maybe even 3 hours before your session, that protein's probably still digesting and you can just, not really be in too much of a rush. But not the end of the world if you have some protein sooner rather than later. What else? Protein sources I just touched on. Animal proteins, for the most part, are generally higher quality, but with a little bit of planning and a little bit of smart food combinations, we can make vegan protein sources very high quality as well, whether it's taking two incomplete proteins and making them a complete protein when we combine them, or by consuming complete vegan proteins like soy products, namely tofu and tempeh. Supplements, that's what I didn't really touch on. So let's touch on supplements. I've got a lot of experience in the supplement world. Now, when you look at protein supplements, you have a few different categories. So you've got whey proteins, or like dairy-based proteins. You have casein proteins, where during the milk production, during the cheese production process, you have the solid portion that gets separated out and is cheese, and you also have the liquid portion. Well, you have the leftovers from the cheese production process, and you're left with whey protein and casein protein. So whey protein and casein protein, they're two dairy-derived proteins. Casein protein is a lot slower to digest and may take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to digest. Whey protein is going to be a little bit faster to digest, depending on the processing of the whey protein. It may digest anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. So that's the main category of proteins. Then you have a bunch of others as well, but I'm going to touch on the main ones. So you've got whey proteins, where you have whey protein concentrates, or you have whey protein isolates. Whey protein isolates are a slightly higher quality of protein, more so because they've removed some of the carbohydrate and fat content. So it's a little bit of a leaner protein, higher protein per serve, or higher protein per 100 grams, and less carbs and fats. And then these days we also have whey protein isolates that are hydrolyzed. Hydrolyzed meaning that proteins have been partially pre-digested. So they've essentially been digested into little peptides or amino acids for you chemically. So they tend to be easier on the digestion. Then you have vegan proteins. It's a pretty good idea to go for a pea and rice blend, in my opinion. Or if you want to go for a soy protein blend, that is going to be great as well. The vegan proteins, just in my experience, they don't taste as good, but if you are vegan and you need to have a vegan protein, have a vegan protein. And for some people, whey protein can wreak absolute havoc on their digestive system, especially if you're sensitive to lactose or just sensitive to dairy. So if you're sensitive to lactose, you could go for a whey protein isolate. For some people, that's fine. But some people would just need to avoid whey protein in like as a whole and go towards a vegan protein. The next category is collagen. God damn it. Collagen has got some goddamn strong marketing behind it, but there's some benefit to collagen, namely, there's some benefit for hair, skin, nails, a little bit of benefit for gut health. It's also got a benefit for joint health as well. But for those of you who are consuming collagen-based protein as a muscle growth protein, or to help you consume high quality protein, collagen is not it. Like, I'm sorry, but collagen protein, it doesn't have the essential amino acid profile that we need it to have. So collagen protein is quite inferior when we look at overall protein quality. So I'm not saying collagen is bad, it's just very inferior compared to a whey protein or a well-formulated vegan protein. If it was my money, I wouldn't buy collagen protein. If you're doing this to increase your daily protein intake and to help with recovery or muscle growth and repair, I'd be choosing a whey protein first, or a well-formulated vegan protein second. If you want to have a collagen protein powder, by all means go for it. But yeah, it's not going to give you as much of a benefit as a whey protein would, or even as much as a vegan protein would, in my opinion. That, I think, is everything that I want to touch on today. So that's been all about protein, episode number 6. I'll go and get Hank for the outro. Big boy was sleeping. Absolutely wrecked. Oh, God damn. Tough life being a dog. All right, so episode number 6, all about protein. Thanks for watching. Thanks for all the feedback. Any questions, feel free to DM me over on Instagram or leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. See you later.